Out there in the real world, companies don't always charge the same price to all their different consumers. There is sometimes what's called price discrimination, where you try to charge a different price to different customers, basically based on the willingness of a consumer to pay more. So, for example, if you have with an airline, if you buy a ticket far in advance, you may be able to get a lower price than if you walk up to the counter and buy the ticket the same day. Okay, the former consumer may be somebody who's planning a vacation, and if the price of the ticket is too high, they just won't go. The guy walks up the day of, may be someone who's got an important business meeting to go to, and it's on an expense account, they're willing to pay whatever because they need to get to the destination on time. So if a firm can try and discriminate amongst those different kinds of consumers, they clearly are going to be able to get a higher price. And so we want to talk about this in the context of what is a bit of economics jargon, which is called first-degree price discrimination, where the firm is able to distinguish among each individual consumer and try and extract all of the consumer surplus from those consumers. Now, let's take a look at a standard demand curve, and as we've talked about before, the height of the demand curve gives the willingness to pay, or the marginal benefit of consumption of the good. And let's say we get a whole bunch of different consumers who are willing to pay different amounts for the good, and that's what is reflected by the different heights. Now, if you had a standard setup and you had a single price that you would charge in the market, all the consumers pay price P1. There's Q1 consumed, and you have this area of consumer surplus, which is A. And just recall what consumer surplus means. That's the difference between the willingness to pay, the total benefit of consuming Q1, when consumers all pay the same price and had expenditures of B. And so you had consumer surplus of A, because some of the consumers were willing to pay a higher price, but only had to pay P1. Now, if the firm is able to somehow segment all of these different consumers, again, for example, with the airline story, and charge a higher price to some and a lower price to the people who will walk otherwise, then you can extract some of the consumer surplus associated with this. Now, so let's first imagine how that would work. You might have the first the business person coming in at the last minute having to pay this price. The person who's willing to come in only 2 days ahead pays that price. So they are paying not P1, but they're paying their total willingness to pay. If you can extract that, then what firms could potentially do is that they could get revenue which included the so-called consumer surplus. The willingness to pay of AB would be what is actually paid in the marketplace. Now, that's a very nice situation for a firm. They're able to pull out into their revenue all of those benefits associated the consumers used to get through consumer surplus if you had a simple price. And you see this kind of price discrimination in many different parts of an economy. One of the difficult things is trying to identify who those people are and what they're willing to pay. There's a lot of information that you would need. So there are ways in which firms will try and do that. You may offer an early bird special. If you get there before 5 o'clock, then you get the cheaper meal. If you drive your car to the garage and arrive before 8 o'clock in the morning, you get a lower price. So there's ways in which you can try and pull out that, let consumers select into the lower prices based on their willingness to pay. In any event, price discrimination is an important part of the real world and is incorporated in an analytical framework using an example like this.